Hey, hope you're doing well. Andy here from Drive Steady, and today I'm reviewing a Lucid Air Grand Touring and giving you all of its details, along with sharing some of my thoughts on the interior, exterior, and of course taking it for a quick drive. So let's get started with this review of the Lucid Air Grand Touring. So let's start the review off by first thanking Keys Mercedes for giving me access to this Lucid Air today. If you happen to be interested in this car or any other new or pre-owned Mercedes product, make sure you give them a call. I've left their information in the description below. Now let's start off with some pricing and some trim levels, because this Lucid Air is relatively new to most consumers. So Lucid has one model, it's called the Air, and within the Air they've got 4 trim levels. The first one is the Grand Touring, which is somewhat of a special edition, and I'm not even sure you can get one of those anymore, but those start at $169,000. Then you come to the Grand Touring, which is what I've got today, that's $155,000. And then the trim below it, the Air Touring, is $107,000, and the most economical entry into the Air is the Pure, and that is an $87,000 base price. Now, the only one you can pretty much get at this point is the Grand Touring. Lucid says that the lower trim levels are going to be available later on in 2022 and into 2023. All right, now that the trims and pricing are out of the way, let's talk about the exterior design. And much like most EV cars out there, they're polarizing in the Lucid Air. Let's start it off with a stat. This thing has a drag coefficient of 0.21, which makes it one of the most aerodynamically efficient cars on the planet. And it better be, because I kind of don't like the looks. Part of that, I think, is the color. This one is called Zenith Red, and it's not my favorite shade of red. And overall, I don't think it suits the Air very much. Also, I don't like the platinum finish body accents, mainly around the roof and the front by the headlights. But it seems like Lucid is going to make a darker finish called Stealth, and I think that will help the overall look a lot. Now, putting all that aside, me liking it or not, one thing this thing does have is a lot of presence. It has a large and in charge type of look to it on the road. The headlights also look very, very cool. But having experienced cars like the Model S Plaid, the Porsche Taycan, the Audi e-tron GT, and the EQS from Mercedes, I would have to say that in the looks department, this comes in near the bottom for me, probably 4th or maybe even 5th. All right, so because this is an EV car, let's get into the nitty-gritty details about the battery, the motors, the charging, and the range. So the batteries in the Lucid Air, it's a 112 kilowatt an hour battery, and this is class leading as the entry-level battery in an EV car. So kudos to Lucid for advancing the technology in this arena. Now, if you wanted to get a bigger battery, there is a performance level option within the Grand Touring that bumps it up to a 118 kilowatt an hour battery. Now, as far as motors go, you've got 2 of them, one in the front and one in the rear, which makes this an all-wheel driven car, and it's all connected to a single speed transmission. So all of this equates to a horsepower figure of 816 and a torque figure of 855. Now, if you were to opt for that extra performance or that bigger battery, 1,050 horsepower and 921 pounds-feet of torque. Some ridiculous numbers in these EV cars now. As far as 0 to 60 time, in this Grand Touring model, you get 3 seconds, and in that performance trim, I keep mentioning 2.6 seconds, so it's not exactly Tesla Model S Plaid acceleration type numbers, but it's pretty darn good considering that this car weighs almost 5,300 pounds. Now, one of the interesting things about the Lucid Air are its driving modes, and there's 3 of them: Smooth, Swift, and Sprint. So in smooth mode, just think of it as the comfort or normal setting, and that bogs down the horsepower to 536 and 620 pounds-feet of torque. Swift, think of this as sport, and that leaves the horsepower at the same number, but bumps the torque up to 645. Then when you go into Sprint, think of this as track or Sport Plus mode, and that unlocks the full 800 plus horsepower and 800 plus pounds-feet of torque. All right, so now as I'm next to the charging port here on the passenger side, let's talk about the range and then move into charging. So this has a class-leading 516 miles of range specifically for this example or this configuration of the Lucid Air. This is the 112 kilowatt an hour battery Grand Touring package with the 19-inch wheels. So this is the most efficient configuration for extra range. Now, if you wanted to get bigger wheels on this configuration, that'll give you a range penalty, probably a weight penalty as well. But if you wanted the performance trim, that bumps it down to 446 miles of range with the bigger battery and more horsepower. Now, as far as charging goes, this is built on another revolutionary 900 volt architecture, and that means you can DC fast charge to speeds up to 300 kilowatts an hour. Now, as far as the door of the charging port, so this is a CCS type charger, and you've obviously got other adapters to make it compatible with other charging ports, but this is a electronic opening and closing door. You control it using the infotainment screen on the interior, just a button, and it kind of slides down very elegantly and kind of gives it that luxurious theme that the Lucid Air is after. All right, now let's talk about some of the wheels, tires, brakes, and suspension, and some interesting choices Lucid has made here before we move on to some more practical topics like the cargo space, the trunk, the frunk, and the interior. So starting off with the suspension, this is one of the interesting things that Lucid has done on the Air, and that is give it a standard coilover adaptive shock suspension. Now, most of the other EV cars that I mentioned at the outset of the video, all of those cars have air suspension. They have the ability to raise and lower itself, but this car is just on a fixed coilover suspension. Well, not fixed, but a coilover suspension, fixed ride height. And the dampers, you have the ability to make them harsher or softer based off of your driving conditions and the driving modes. But I think Lucid is trying to make this feel a little bit more driver-ish. And I read an article saying something about the person who tuned the suspension on this car also tuned it alongside a GT3 RS from Porsche. So I'm genuinely interested to see how this feels behind the wheel. And we'll get to that here in a minute. But as I mentioned earlier, these wheels are the 19-inch wheels. You can bump these all the way up to 21-inch designs. And there's multiple designs that Lucid is offering on the Air, which is pretty cool. Inside the wheelbarrows, I couldn't figure out the rotor size. There isn't anything published online, so if you know anything, make sure you leave a comment down below. But it does have silver painted Lucid brakes, which look really cool, and the tires are 245s on all four corners. So with all that out of the way, now let's jump to the practicality topics I just mentioned, starting off by looking at the trunk and the frunk. All right, so because this is an EV car, you've got a front compartment, aka a frunk. So let's talk about it really quickly. The interesting thing about it is that it has a clamshell style covering here, which looks really cool, especially once you discover that it's clamshell and you look at it this way. But nonetheless, the front storage compartment is actually very, very generous and the largest I've seen in any of the EV cars I've driven. It's got a really wide mouth. It's not very deep here, but it's got a second level that gives it that second level of depth, and you can actually fit a larger carry-on bag in here. In addition to that, once you got this top cover on, maybe a couple medium-sized duffel bags in here. So just this front compartment is 10 cubic feet of space, and I think plenty of storage just to carry around your day-to-day items. Now let's go around to the other side and take a look at the trunk. All right, now let's talk about the actual trunk back here. But one thing I neglected to mention when I was talking about the frunk is a way that you can open it. So there's a button on the key, you long press that, and that will open the frunk. You also have the ability to do it from the infotainment screen inside of the car. It's also electronic closing. There's a little button right here inside of the compartment that will electronically close the trunk or the frunk for you. Now let's talk about the trunk, and this is actually very obscure and weird looking. It's very, very wide. It's kind of like this big mouth that just says, "Feed me with your stuff." So there's 22 cubic feet of space in the back here, and if you're doing the math, there's 10 up front, 22 back here, combined 32, and it's very generous. It's extremely wide with very small obstructions in order for you to fit your things in there. I would say 2 larger suitcases and then maybe some extra duffel bags. There's a lot of stuff down here, and the additional benefit of this having a second level as well that is pretty deep on its own. You can probably fit 2 duffel bags in here, so you can fit a lot of stuff in a Lucid Air, considering the openings and considering you have 2 trunks, and both trunks, or 2 storage compartments, and both storage compartments have a second level which you can put stuff in if you wanted to. So plenty of storage space in the Lucid Air. Alright, so now the interior of the Lucid Air, and I think this is one of the stronger points of this car, the way this interior is set up. And let me start explaining by talking about the design and the quality. So starting off with the quality, there's a mixture of materials in here with leather and wood and aluminum and Alcantara and this somewhat fabric type material here, and it's a really nice looking place. The design is really cool with the floating screen, which I'll talk about here in a second, and the overall simplicity of the interior is very nicely put together. I really like the front passenger area here a lot. I'll talk about the back separately here in a minute or so. But the design and the quality are top notch. One of the things that actually impressed me is the fact that this lower dash portion here is covered in this cloth type, fabric type material. And I actually prefer this much more to some of the other cars in the EV range where you bang on some of these things and it's a plastic. So this makes it seem a little softer, a little bit more elegant, and more modern actually as well. So I really like this touch down here. Now, as far as seating and comfort and overall size in the front, I think this is a really nice size front cabin area. The seat is very comfortable. The nice thing about it is you have the ability to adjust it using the traditional controls here down in the bottom left corner, but you also have the ability to fine-tune and customize things from within the infotainment screen. So for example, if you wanted to expand your thigh support, your backrest width, basically your bolstering and all that stuff, that happens from within the infotainment system down here in the screen. But overall size is fantastic here as well. As far as headroom, I'm 5'11", and this glass roof, which I'll talk about here, is very cool. It doesn't intrude in any way. I have several inches of headroom up on top of me. Now, one other thing about the seats is that they're heated and they're massaging, and the massaging feature works really well. Probably the best massaging seat I've sat in any car, period. And the thing about it is that it's very aggressive. It kind of really gives you a massage. All right, so now let's switch over and talk about the technology, and there are 4 screens in this car. This center floating screen here is divided into 3 sections, but the combined screen real estate is 34 inches, and it's such a cool thing to look at. I love the design of it, the fact that it's somewhat floating here on the opposite ends of the screen. But the screen is actually very cool and very clever, intuitively designed. So all of the buttons that the driver would control and would traditionally be a stock or some type of knob is integrated into this left smaller screen, and these are the headlights, the windshield wipers, and all of these wonderful things. The charging port is all conveniently placed right here in the screen. The center section is the gauge cluster. It tells you how fast you're going, how much range you've got, all these other things that you would traditionally expect in a gauge cluster. And then you come on over into this somewhat infotainment screen, and then this infotainment screen is tied to the screen down here at the bottom. Now, one thing about this lower screen is you have the ability to fold it in, but this screen seems like it's malfunctioning because when I push the button to fold the screen in, it won't fold in or slide in. So unfortunately, I can't show you that. But nonetheless, this thing does fold in to get out of the way and reveal a extra storage compartment. So let's forget about that slight malfunction. I'm sure that will get resolved eventually. But let's talk about the rest of the screens and some of the other characteristics and what I think about it. So I like the way how this screen here is kind of focused towards the driver, and it's got simple shortcut keys to the home, your audio, your navigation, and your phone. Those are the things that you're going to use most frequently, and I love how there's shortcut keys there, and everything is just very simply laid out. There isn't a lot of information coming at you, and basically they've got everything that you would use most frequently as shortcut keys, and I really like that a lot. I don't really want to fiddle with a bunch of stuff, so I just use this top screen for most of the things I use a lot, and I'm done. But down here you've got a more extensive system, obviously a larger screen here with more things that you can control. So for example, your seats, as I mentioned, are controlled from here. The massaging is controlled from here. This is where you would be able to open and close your frunk, your trunk, your charging port, all of these wonderful things. There's a sunshade you can also control, and of course the charging, this will give you exactly how much charge you have left. You can open and close the charging port from this screen as well, set a charging limit, all of those things. Now with all of these screens and all of this technology going on here, the best thing about it is that it's simple, it's easy to use, and it's intuitive. I say that because when somebody jumps into a car like this, it's somewhat intimidating. You see all these big screens and you say to yourself, oh my gosh, how am I supposed to use this if you're just used to some buttons and some switches and knobs for general functionality of an interior? And I can see this being somewhat of a point of apprehension for somebody coming into a car like this. But to see that Lucid has really designed this infotainment system and this interior in the simplest fashion that I've seen executed in quite some time is a major thumbs up and major kudos to them. It's a really simple thing to use. I jumped in here and within a few minutes I was like, is it really that simple? And indeed it is. And that's just a wonderful, wonderful thing in today's day and age with complicated infotainment systems. And now let me wrap it up with some of the amenities in here. So this glass roof is actually one of the cooler things that you would see in any car, period, EV or gas powered. It's got this really interesting look to it, and the fact that the visors are kind of floating is very, very nice to look at. And one of the things about it is that it does have a protective UV ray, so on hot days, according to Lucid, this does protect you from the heat or the sun from outside, but I would venture to guess that it's probably not as good as having a steel roof, and some heat is probably going to penetrate through this thing. Although I know that Lucid is also developing some other type of glass roof with more protection, somewhat like the Magic Sky roof that Mercedes has that kind of basically tints the roof. So we'll see there. And some of the other things, storage is actually fantastic here. You have really large map pockets, really generous amounts of space here right behind the cup holders, and you even have a center compartment storage area here. As far as charging goes, you have one wireless charging port, one USB Type-C, and one USB Type-A. So a decent amount of charging ports for the front area. So with that out of the way, now let's go to the back and talk about what's going on over there. Alright, so now the back seats of the Lucid Air, and let me start off with the overall size. So you can see that I have plenty of legroom, humongous amounts of legroom here. I'm sitting behind myself at 5'11", and this is a really large cabin area in the back. It feels almost bigger than the numbers state that it is because of the overall packaging is what it seems like. On top of me, the glass roof, I've got about 2 inches of space up here, so somebody 6 feet tall or maybe a little bit taller will probably fit back here just fine. The overall cloth materials on the roof here continue on, and just this glass roof, seeing outside of it and having it be such a large piece is really cool. Now, some of the other amenities that you can option into this, there is an executive package that gives you 2 seats here that you can kind of do this lounging motion on, but this one is equipped with the standard seats. Charging, you have 2 USB Type-C outlets, and that's always a thumbs up. You have to have charging back here. And then you have a little storage compartment here as well behind those charging ports. And then there's a little screen here that allows you to control the climate zone. So there's one for each passenger back here, and also your heated seats. And quite interestingly, this center seat is actually heated as well. And speaking of the center seat, Lucid is very proud of this back seat and says that 3 full-size adult individuals can sit back here, and I can certainly see that. There's plenty of room back here. The thing that always concerns me is like shoulder room, because you probably gonna have to nudge a little bit closer to the window to get 3 larger individuals in here. But nonetheless, this is a really, really large interior or back seat. So the cup holders here in the armrest, and another storage area back here. So storage is the theme. You've got storage here and storage here, so plenty to go around in the back seat as well. But that's pretty much it on the interior. It's a really nice place to be. I could see somebody easily daily driving this without any issues. The quality, the infotainment system being super simple and not intrusive, and the overall thought process of this interior, because they've kind of dialed in some tactile things like the buttons on the steering wheel, and then the buttons for the air conditioning system and the volume knob. So it gives a nice balance for somebody transitioning from an EV or from a gas-powered car into an EV car like this Lucid. So now, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and take this thing on the road and see what it feels like behind the wheel. All right, so now the driving portion of the Lucid Air review. And as always, these are what the keys look like, plural keys. So there's a card key like this one, and then there's a traditional looking key like this one, and there's actually a third key as well. You can use your smartphone to double as your key fob, so you don't carry around a key fob or any unnecessary knickknacks if you're a minimalist. But nonetheless, just give me a second to pack these things away. All right, so the visibility in this car is okay. And the reason why I say okay is out front, I see the glare or the reflection of the dash, and then considering the fact that the glass roof has a tinted portion, I wish that that came up a little bit higher so I can have better visibility, or something has to be done with the reflection up onto the glass up here. But out the sides, out the back, it's fantastic. There's blind spot monitoring, there's cameras. The camera system in this thing is fantastic. It has multiple viewing angles, and then you can use this center screen here and then the top screen in conjunction, and they work really nicely together and give you great visibility. So now let's go ahead and go for a quick spin. All right, so this thing does have like a pin, so every time I've been moving this thing around, I need to enter in a pin, and I don't want to take it off because I'm not sure exactly, maybe the dealer put it on there on purpose. But let's go. So the stock is actually like a Mercedes. It's on the column here. You pull it down and it puts you in drive. And I'm going to start off in smooth mode, and this is actually a very interesting driving experience, whether you've driven an EV car or not. It's very smooth, and then the hood line is basically not there. You cannot see a thing, and it's just all road. It's almost like you're munching at the road in front of you. So it's very cool, and the seating position is pretty high as well. So it gives you somewhat of a command seating position. Now I'm going to get a straight stretch of road. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to see how it feels in a straight line in Swift and in Sprint mode. And I'm not going to do it in smooth, because the difference between smooth and Swift mode is like about 20 pounds-feet of torque. So I'm just going to leave it at that. Let's do it with Swift first, and then we'll do it with Sprint afterwards. So here we go. Swift, foot to the floor. Oh wow, plenty fast enough. Definitely pulls strong through the, I don't know, RPM range, but not RPM range, but as you keep your foot to the floor, you definitely have some power, and it gives you a good sensation of speed in the Swift mode. So I would imagine in smooth, this is more than enough to drive on the highway or pass or enter the highway. So no issues with the first two modes and speed, using it on a daily basis, or even if you just wanted to have a little bit of fun. So one cool thing, as I was turning left there, the gauge cluster actually turned the camera on, and I could see the side border or the sidewalk, and that's actually a very clever way to do things. And as I'm changing lanes, it turns on, so not only do I have the blind spot monitor and whatnot, but this camera also turns on. Okay, so let's put it in sprint. It asks me to confirm, and I do confirm. I want to go into sprint mode, and let us see what this is like. Oh wow, significantly faster. Holy moly, wow, what a difference. Woo! Wow, what a difference, sprint mode. Jeez, woo, hold on to your seats if you mash the gas in this car. This is a properly fast car. Woo, wow, I wasn't really expecting that, but man, that's really fast. Oh, I forgot that feeling in the EV, and it like sucks your gut in, and if you're not ready, pushing your head against the headrest, it makes you lightheaded and somewhat car sick. But these EV cars, man, the torque from zero. Oh man, if you're somebody who gets lightheaded very quickly, these cars are man. Okay, so I'm gonna put it back in smooth actually. And so this is a properly fast car. It's not scary fast like the Model S Plaid is. That just like, it's on a different level, but it is properly fast, and will give you, somebody who is not expecting or has never driven an EV car gets into this and mashes the gas, will probably get a little scared. But so the speed is good. Now the brake pedal is not like a sports car brake pedal. This is of course marketed as a luxury car, and I think the brake pedal is tuned to meet that level of driving experience. The steering and the suspension are actually quite surprising because they switch their character very nicely. So in smooth mode, it's exactly that. It's very nice to drive. It soaks up the bumps really nicely and mostly rivals the other luxury EV cars as well within the same category. And as expected, so really nice smooth riding car in the smooth mode. And then when you put it in Swift and in Sprint, you can definitely tell the difference with the body motions because it handles it much better. Now don't get it confused, this is still a almost 5,300 pound car, and you can definitely feel the weight in this thing when you're giving it sharp inputs. But at the same time, it still likes to dance and gives you a decent amount of feel. And I like the fact that when you're in Swift and in Sprint mode, it handles a little bit sharper. And I certainly see that Lucid is trying to make this feel a little bit more driver-centric in these modes. Now, one of the other things in this car is one-pedal driving, and this is tuned rather aggressively. I'm in the normal mode, and this is more than strong enough. If you're not expecting it, it does a fantastic job in slowing the car down. This is actually quite different than what I saw in the Porsche Taycan. And if you're a one-pedal driver, whether in the standard mode and then the much more aggressive mode is really going to slow you down. You don't have to use the brakes so long as you can time the thing right, and it works really nicely. So what is this thing overall? I think this is a fantastic first effort from Lucid. People honking at me, get it, this thing gets a lot of attention. I just can't get around the looks. I spend probably about 2 days with this car, and it's just not my thing. It's subjective, you might like it, but it doesn't move the needle for me. Now again, overall this is a fantastic thing as a version 1 car. Is it perfect? No. This screen not working, maybe I'm not doing it right, but it's not working, I can't figure it out, is rather unacceptable. And it doesn't have Android Auto or Apple CarPlay, so it definitely has room for improvement. I certainly hope that they're able to convince some folks to buy this car and to give them feedback about the overall driving experience and whatnot, so they can improve, because I think this car has plenty of bandwidth to improve their platform. Seems like it's got plenty of roadway to make incremental improvements to refine, because when you're competing with car companies like Mercedes and Porsche and even Tesla, who've been around for quite some time now, those are companies that have a long history in luxury and refinement. Most certainly Mercedes and Porsche do. So you got to put in your A effort to make sure this thing is as good as it can be. So that's pretty much it. If you've got any other questions, please make sure you leave me a comment down below or send me a message on Instagram at DriveSteady. Otherwise, thank you for watching this video. Until next time, drive steady.